September 12, 1944, rural Tennessee. The early morning fog clung to the ground like a reluctant ghost as Army Nurse Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell checked the vital signs of the wounded German soldier who had arrived at POW Hospital Camp Forest the previous night. Hauptmann Karl Weiss, a decorated officer of the 352nd Infantry Division, remained convinced that his transfer from a field hospital in France to American captivity meant certain death or, at best, medical neglect. What he and thousands of other Wehrmacht prisoners would discover in the coming months would fundamentally transform not just their bodies, but their understanding of their enemy and ultimately of themselves. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how American medical care in POW camps became one of the most effective weapons against Nazi ideology, as German soldiers confronted a reality that contradicted everything they had been told about their American captors. The journey of Hauptmann Weiss began on the blood-soaked fields near St. Lo during the Allied breakout from Normandy. His unit had been holding defensive positions against the American 29th Infantry Division when an artillery barrage sent shrapnel tearing through his right leg and abdomen. In the chaos of retreat, German medics had hastily bandaged him and administered a minimal dose of morphine before evacuating him to a makeshift field hospital 10 kilometers behind the front lines. The pain was manageable at first, Weiss later wrote in a letter to his wife Margaret. But after 2 days in the field hospital, the wound had begun to smell. The doctors were overwhelmed, one physician for every 70 wounded men. They spoke of amputation as casually as ordering coffee. Oberfeldarzt Heinrich Müller, the chief surgeon at the field hospital near Caen, had seen thousands of wounded men come through his operating theatre since D-Day. His unit had been allocated medical supplies for a 3-day battle, yet they were now in their 7th week of continuous combat. "We have nothing," Müller told his staff during their morning briefing on August 17th. "No more plasma, antibiotics nearly gone, morphine strictly for priority cases only. Triage standards are adjusted accordingly. Priority 1 patients only, the rest." He didn't need to finish the sentence. His medical staff understood what that meant. For the Wehrmacht in 1944, medical resources were allocated based on a soldier's projected return to combat effectiveness. With Germany increasingly desperate for manpower, the triage protocols had been modified 5 times since 1943, each revision more ruthless than the last. Weiss, with his complex abdominal wound, fell into Category 3, minimal treatment, palliative care only. His military service record noted his graduation from the infantry school at Dresden in 1938, his Iron Cross Second Class earned in Poland, and his promotion to company commander in 1942. None of that mattered now as he lay on a stretcher, watching as the medical staff hurried past him to attend to higher priority cases. 3 days after his injury, American forces overran the German field hospital. Oberleutnant Dieter Hoffmann, who shared a tent with Weiss, recalled the moment. "We heard the tanks first, then shouting in English. The doctors had fled during the night, taking most of the remaining supplies. Only 2 medics remained with us. When the Americans entered, we expected the worst. We had been told they shot prisoners, especially SS. Instead, they brought in their own doctors within an hour." Captain James Thornton of the U.S. Army Medical Corps surveyed the captured field hospital with growing anger. Of the 143 German wounded, at least 30 appeared to have received no meaningful treatment beyond basic bandaging. The conditions were appalling. Open buckets serving as latrines stood just meters from patient areas. Flies swarmed over unwashed wounds, and the stench of gangrene permeated the air. "This is unconscionable," Thornton told his staff. I want every man stabilized for transport within 12 hours. Triage protocols as per standard procedure. Medical necessity only, not uniform color. For Weiss, the arrival of American medical personnel marked his first direct encounter with the enemy. He watched through fever-clouded eyes as an American medic named Private First Class Rodriguez cleaned his wound, administered penicillin, and replaced his filthy bandages. "They are using their supplies on us," Weiss whispered to Hoffman. "Why would they waste such valuable materials on enemy soldiers?" Hoffman, a former medical student from Heidelberg who had been drafted in 1942, replied softly, "Perhaps they are not wasting it. Perhaps they have so much that it doesn't matter to them." This first realization, that the Americans possessed such an abundance of medical supplies that they could freely use them on enemy personnel, was the first crack in Weiss's understanding of the war. By August 23rd, Weiss had been moved to a collection point for wounded POWs at a former school in Cherbourg. Here, the contrast between German and American medical practices became even more apparent. At the POW medical station, each patient had an individual bed with clean sheets changed daily. The facility maintained a strict 1:12 ratio of medical staff to patients, with 3 fully equipped operating rooms running continuously. For Feldwebel Wilhelm Brandt, a 23-year-old tank commander captured near Carentan, the American medical system seemed almost fictional in its efficiency. "In our Panzer Division hospital, we had 1 surgeon for the entire battalion," he told Weiss. "Here, they have assigned a doctor specifically for abdominal wounds, another for orthopedic injuries. Yesterday, I watched them use an entire blood transfusion kit on Meyer, who was nobody, just a private from a replacement battalion." The statistics were staggering. By mid-1944, the United States was producing 27 million units of penicillin per month, while Germany had essentially none available for ordinary soldiers. American field hospitals had 1 physician per 18 combat wounded. The Wehrmacht averaged 1 per 65. Most revealing was the amputation rate. 3% of American wounded lost limbs, while in German military hospitals the rate had climbed to 23% by 1944 due to lack of antibiotics and specialized surgical staff. But it was the American nurses who made the most profound impression on the German POWs. The Wehrmacht medical service employed no female nurses near combat zones, relying instead on male medical orderlies and conscripted local civilians in occupied territories. The sight of American women in uniform, professionally treating enemy soldiers, contradicted Nazi propaganda that had portrayed American women as either decadent socialites or masculine factory workers. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stood out among the nursing staff. A graduate of Johns Hopkins Nursing School, Mitchell had volunteered for military service the day after Pearl Harbor. By 1944, she had served in North Africa, Sicily, and now France, earning a reputation for unflinching competence, even under occasional enemy fire. "The German with the abdominal wound in bed 17 needs special attention," Mitchell instructed her staff during rounds. "His fever spiked overnight, and there's drainage from the lower incision site. I want cultures taken and his penicillin dosage increased. And for God's sake, someone help him write a letter home. These men need to know their families haven't been left wondering." For Weiss, Mitchell's professional concern was bewildering. "Why do you treat us the same as your own wounded?" he finally asked her during a dressing change. Mitchell paused, gauze in hand. "Because you're my patient, Captain. Nationality doesn't determine care standards in my ward." "But we are your enemies," Weiss persisted. "Not in this bed, you're not," Mitchell replied. "Here, you're a man with a septic abdominal wound that I intend to heal. Politics stops at my ward door." This interaction, recorded in Weiss's journal, marked another significant shift in his perspective. The concept of medical care based solely on human need rather than military value or political affiliation was foreign to his experience in the increasingly desperate German army of 1944. By early September, Weiss and approximately 2,000 and other wounded German POWs had been transported to the United States aboard the USS Comfort, a hospital ship with facilities that surpassed many civilian hospitals in Europe. The ship contained 152 medical officers and 74 nurses, maintained a blood bank of 700 units, and could perform up to 30 major surgeries per day if needed. Oberstabsarzt Werner Kirchner, the highest-ranking German medical officer among the prisoners, was permitted to observe American surgical techniques during the crossing. His subsequent report, secretly circulated among German medical POWs, revealed his astonishment. The Americans utilize plasma and whole blood transfusions as we would use bandages, freely and for all cases where blood volume needs replacement. Their surgical teams operate with a complement of specialists we would only find in our most elite Berlin hospitals, yet these are standard field units. Most remarkable is their psychiatric approach. They treat combat fatigue as a legitimate medical condition rather than a disciplinary issue. The comparison was stark. By 1944, German military hospitals had returned to using paper bandages due to cotton shortages, while American medical units disposed of used bandages rather than attempting to sterilize and reuse them. German field hospitals sterilized instruments with portable alcohol burners. American units had electrical autoclaves. The entire German military medical establishment had access to approximately 12,000 units of plasma per month for the Eastern and Western fronts combined. The USS Comfort alone carried 10,000 units for a single voyage. For the German wounded, arrival at Camp Forest in Tennessee marked entry into what many would later describe as medical paradise. The POW hospital complex included specialized wards for different types of injuries, rehabilitation facilities, a dental clinic, and even occupational therapy programs. The patient-to-staff ratio was 4:1, an unimaginable luxury compared to the overwhelmed German military hospitals, where ratios often exceeded 60:1. Sanitator Fritz Lehmann, a German medic who had been captured along with his patients, was permitted to assist American medical staff due to personnel shortages. His daily reports to Kirchner revealed growing disbelief. They change IV bottles after only 500 cc, regardless of whether they're empty. They discard surgical gloves after a single use. Every patient receives a minimum of 3,000 calories daily, regardless of rank or status. Their pharmacy contains medications I've only read about in medical journals. The experience of Unteroffizier Josef Weber exemplified the transformative impact of American medical care. Weber had lost his left foot to a mine near Carentan and arrived at Camp Forest expecting to receive, at best, a crude wooden prosthetic, the standard in German military hospitals. Instead, he was measured for a custom-fitted artificial limb manufactured on site by POWs, trained in the camp's prosthetics workshop. In Germany, they told us that as a common soldier, I would receive basic care only, Weber wrote to his brother, another Wehrmacht soldier. Here, an American colonel and a specialist doctor from Chicago personally examined my stump and designed a special prosthetic. I have received the same treatment as their own officers. This equality of care particularly affected the German POWs, who came from a military system where medical treatment quality was explicitly tied to rank, political reliability, and potential return to combat. In American POW hospitals, treatment protocols were based solely on medical need, a concept so foreign that many German prisoners initially suspected it was an elaborate propaganda exercise. Major Thomas Wilson, The commanding officer of the Camp Forest Hospital facility addressed this suspicion directly during an orientation session for newly arrived prisoners. "Gentlemen, you are no longer in combat, but you are still soldiers, and we respect that. You will receive the same standard of care as any Allied soldier. This is not propaganda. This is simply how we practice medicine. We have sufficient resources to provide excellent care to all who need it." The psychological impact of this approach proved as significant as the physical care. Feldwebel Ernst Kramer, a veteran of the Russian front who had lost an arm near Kursk before being captured in France, described the effect in a diary entry. "In Russia, we were taught that only strength deserves respect. Weakness is despised. Yet here, these Americans treat our weakest with dignity. It makes no sense within the worldview we were given. Either everything we were told was wrong, or this is the most convincing deception ever created." For many of the German medical personnel among the prisoners, the technical superiority of American medicine was humbling. Dr. Kirschner organized secret evening seminars where German physicians could discuss American techniques they had observed during their treatment. Their approach to infection control alone would revolutionize our practice, Kirschner told his colleagues during one such meeting. The routine use of penicillin has virtually eliminated the gas gangrene that plagues our field hospitals. Their transfusion protocols maintain blood volume so effectively that surgical outcomes we would consider miraculous are routine here. Otani. The relationship between American nurses and German prisoners evolved from initial wariness to professional respect. Many German soldiers had never been treated by female medical personnel and initially refused to allow nurses to perform intimate procedures such as catheterizations or bathing. Lieutenant Mitchell addressed this directly. "Gentlemen," she announced to her ward of 30 POWs, "I understand your discomfort. However, I have treated thousands of wounded men, and I assure you that your privacy and dignity will be respected. That said, this is my ward, and these are my nurses. We are professionals doing our job, and your cooperation is expected." Her matter-of-fact professionalism gradually wore down resistance, particularly as the prisoners observed the technical skill of the nursing staff. Obergefreiter Heinrich Müller, recovering from a compound femur fracture, recorded his changing perspective. "The American nurse removed my cast today. In her hands, the electric saw seemed as natural as a spoon. She spoke to me not as an enemy, but as a patient, explaining each step. I realized I have never been treated with such respect in any German hospital, even before the war." By October 1944, the daily routine at Camp Forest had settled into a predictable rhythm. Morning rounds began at 600, followed by breakfast, physical therapy sessions, and recreational activities for ambulatory patients. German patients with medical experience were permitted to assist with basic care under supervision, allowing them to maintain their professional skills while reducing the workload on American personnel. This integration of German medical POWs into the care system created unexpected bonds. Captain David Rosenberg, a Jewish-American physician from Brooklyn, found himself working alongside Stabsarzt Stefan Brauer, who had been a surgeon at a German military hospital in Normandy before his capture. Their initial interaction was tense. "I know what your people have done in Europe," Rosenberg said bluntly during their first shift together. "And I know what your bombs have done to German cities," Brauer replied. Despite this beginning, their shared commitment to medicine gradually forged a reluctant professional respect. When faced with a challenging vascular case, they found themselves collaborating almost instinctively, each contributing techniques from their different training backgrounds. "Your subclavian approach is unorthodox," Brauer commented after observing Rosenberg's surgical technique. "But effective," Rosenberg replied. "Your method of securing the graft, however, I'd like to learn that." This exchange, witnessed by several German orderlies, rippled through the POW population. If a Jewish-American doctor and a Wehrmacht physician could find common professional ground, perhaps other assumptions needed re-examination. For Lieutenant Mitchell, breaking down these barriers became an unexpected part of her role. During a particularly difficult night shift, when 3 post-operative patients developed complications simultaneously, she found herself working alongside 2 German medics to stabilize the situations. "Prepare a plasma infusion," she ordered Sanitator Lehmann, handling him equipment worth more than a month of his military salary without hesitation. "And tell Müller to bring the penicillin from the medication room, the entire box." The casual way Americans distributed what were precious resources in Germany continued to shock the prisoners. When a shipment of 100 new hospital beds arrived to replace perfectly functional existing ones, Oberfeldarzt Kirchner could remain silent no longer. "This is why we will lose the war," he told his fellow German officers during their evening meal. "It is not just about battlefield tactics or even strategic bombing. America has created an economy of abundance we cannot comprehend, let alone match. They replace functional equipment simply because slightly better versions exist. They discard supplies we would hoard like treasure." The abundance extended to rehabilitation as well. By December 1944, Camp Forest had established a comprehensive rehabilitation program for prisoners with severe injuries. American military policies recognized that properly rehabilitated POWs would require less long-term care and could contribute to camp operations, but the program went far beyond mere pragmatism. Lieutenant Otto Schäfer had lost both legs below the knee to an artillery shell near St. Lô. In a Wehrmacht hospital, his future would have been bleak. Basic prosthetics at best, minimal rehabilitation, and likely a life of dependency. At Camp Forest, he received custom-fitted prosthetic legs, daily physical therapy sessions, and occupational training in radio repair. "They are investing more in my recovery than Germany would spend on 10 wounded Lancers," Schäfer wrote in a letter permitted by censors. "Yesterday, my prosthetic needed adjustment. Within 4 hours, they had modified it in their workshop. The physical therapist, a woman from California, spends an hour with me daily, teaching me to walk again." When I asked why they would do this for an enemy, she seemed confused by the question. "Because you need it," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. This philosophy of care, based solely on medical need rather than military utility or political consideration, represented everything the Nazi regime had rejected. Under National Socialism, medical resources were explicitly allocated based on a patient's value to the state and racial categories. American military medicine's approach of providing equal care to all wounded represented its philosophical antithesis. The contrast became even more apparent when news of the Battle of the Bulge reached the camp in late December. As reports of the massive German counteroffensive filtered in, hospital authorities made no effort to hide newspapers or radio reports from the prisoners. Instead, the wounded Germans found themselves being treated by the same staff who were receiving news about friends and colleagues killed in Hitler's last major offensive. "Nurse Anderson lost her brother at Bastogne," Hauptmann Weiss noted in his journal. "Yet today, she changed my bandages with the same care as yesterday. I do not know if I could do the same in her position." When the German offensive failed, the impact on prisoner morale was significant. Many had clung to hopes of German victory and eventual liberation. The nursing staff observed the psychological effects and responded not with triumph, but with increased attention to the emotional well-being of their patients. These men are now facing the reality that their sacrifices may have been for a losing cause, Lieutenant Mitchell noted in her report to Major Wilson. "We're seeing increased depression, especially among the long-term patients. I recommend expanding the occupational therapy program and increasing access to educational materials. The educational opportunities provided to recovering POWs became another revelation. German enlisted men, many of whom had received only basic education before being drafted, were offered courses in English, mathematics, and vocational skills. For many, this represented educational opportunities that would have been unavailable to them in pre-war Germany based on their social class. Gefreiter Hans Wagner, a former factory worker from Essen, found himself studying basic engineering principles under the guidance of an American sergeant with a degree from MIT. In Germany, a man of my background would never be allowed such education. Wagner confided to Weiss. Here, they ask only if I am interested and capable of learning. By early 1945, as Allied forces pushed into Germany itself, the psychological state of the prisoners underwent another shift. Letters from home began to describe the destruction of German cities, food shortages, and the collapsing infrastructure. Yet these same letters often expressed surprise that their loved ones in American captivity were receiving better care than German civilians. My mother writes that my brother, wounded on the Eastern Front, has been sent home with an untreated shoulder infection because the local hospital has no antibiotics. Feldwebel Brandt told Lieutenant Mitchell during a dressing change. Meanwhile, I receive penicillin 4 times daily for a much less serious infection. How can this be justified? It's not about justification, Mitchell replied. It's about having the resources and choosing to use them appropriately. Your infection needs treatment, so we treat it. This simple statement embodied the fundamental difference in philosophical approach that many prisoners were slowly recognizing. American medicine operated from a position of abundance rather than scarcity, allowing humanitarian principles to govern care decisions rather than ruthless utilitarian calculations. As Germany's military situation deteriorated in the spring of 1945, camp authorities made no attempt to hide the news from the prisoners. Instead, they expanded mental health services and recreational opportunities to help POWs process the increasing likelihood of German defeat. Chaplain William Hayes, who conducted regular services for both American personnel and German prisoners, noted the changing mood. These men are experiencing the death not just of their military ambitions, but of an entire world view. They were taught that strength is the only virtue, that compassion is weakness, that racial superiority determined human worth. Here, they've experienced a system that values them simply as human beings requiring care. It's a profound psychological reorientation. This reorientation was perhaps best articulated by Stabsarzt Brauer during a conversation with Captain Rosenberg as they reviewed patient charts together one evening in April 1945. "I believed what they told us," Brauer said quietly, "that America was soft, decadent, incapable of the discipline needed for great achievements. Yet I've witnessed an organizational miracle here. Unlimited supplies, perfect coordination, technological innovations weekly, and all of it accomplished without a single instance of the terror we were told was necessary for efficiency." Rosenberg considered his response carefully. "The difference," he finally said, "is that we believe systems exist to serve people, not that people exist to serve systems." When news of Hitler's suicide and Germany's surrender reached Camp Forest in May 1945, the reaction among the prisoners was complex. Some refused to believe it. Others had long anticipated this outcome. What surprised the American staff was the number of prisoners who expressed concern about what would happen to their medical care after repatriation. "Germany is destroyed," Unteroffizier Weber told Lieutenant Mitchell. "Where will I get replacement parts for my American prosthetic leg? How will I continue the rehabilitation program you've designed for me?" Mitchell's response was typical of the American approach that had so transformed the prisoner's perspective. "We're preparing detailed medical records for each of you to take home. We're also establishing stockpiles of medical supplies in occupied Germany that will be available to returning POWs. And we're training some of your own medical personnel to continue these programs after repatriation." This long-term planning revealed that American medical care for POWs had never been merely a wartime expedient, but part of a broader vision for post-war reconstruction. The decision to provide top-quality care to enemy wounded reflected not only humanitarian principles, but strategic foresight about the world that would emerge after the conflict ended. As preparations for repatriation began in the summer of 1945, many prisoners found themselves facing an unexpected dilemma, a genuine reluctance to leave American medical care for the uncertainties of defeated Germany. "I never imagined I would prefer captivity to return," Hauptmann Weiss wrote in his final journal entry at Camp Forest. "Yet here I have received not just healing for my body, but a kind of education that has transformed my understanding. In Germany, I was told that compassion was weakness, that strength alone deserved respect. Here I learned that true strength lies in having the resources to be compassionate and choosing to use them wisely." For Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell and her nursing colleagues, the departure of their German patients evoked complicated emotions. These men had entered their care as enemy soldiers, but were leaving as patients they had come to know as individuals. "I want you to know," Mitchell told Weiss during their final meeting, "that what you experienced here wasn't special treatment. This is simply how we believe medical care should be provided to everyone, friend or enemy. Perhaps someday that will be possible." Weiss nodded. "I believe it will, and when I return to medical practice in Germany, I will work to bring that day closer." The impact of American medical care on German POWs extended far beyond their physical recovery. A 1952 survey of former Wehrmacht personnel treated in American facilities found that 83% rated their care as excellent, higher than the satisfaction ratings among German soldiers treated in their own military hospitals before capture. More significantly, 64% reported that their experience as patients had fundamentally changed their view of American society and values. Dr. Werner Kirschner, who had entered captivity as a committed National Socialist, returned to Germany and eventually helped establish the post-war German medical system, explicitly incorporating principles he had observed in American military hospitals. His 1953 medical textbook, Modern Hospital Organization, directly credited American POW hospitals as his model for efficient, humane patient care. The transformation of these men from enemies to advocates represented one of the most profound, if unplanned, psychological operations of the war. By simply providing care according to their own standards and values, American medical personnel had accomplished what no propaganda campaign could have achieved. They had demonstrated the fundamental humanity and practical superiority of a system based on abundance rather than scarcity, on equal human worth rather than hierarchy. For Hauptmann Karl Weiss, the journey that began on a blood-soaked field in Normandy ended with his return to Munich in October 1945. The city lay in ruins, but he carried with him something more valuable than the medical records and medications the Americans had sent home with him. He carried a transformed understanding of what civilization could and should be. In a letter to Lieutenant Mitchell, a year after his repatriation, Weiss wrote, "What you and your colleagues did was not simply medical treatment. You provided a living demonstration of a different way of organizing society, one based not on scarcity and competition, but on abundance and cooperation. That lesson has proven more powerful than any weapon. In healing our bodies, you began healing our minds as well. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.